Watch him throw the ball, we gon' pick it off. You gon' let him hit the hole or you gon' cut it off. You gon' play through fourth and long or you gon' punt it off. Your defenders, heavy hitters, put your pads in. Don't be looking for the ref to throw no flags in. Keep the helmet on, keep the cleats tight. You the type to want to win by any means, right? You should look alive. This is Trap or Die.
Yes, sir. Welcome back to another episode of Trap or Die Podcast. I'm your host, Mual, Jamal Forrest, in here with Dre, in here with AJ. Dre and AJ, before y'all talk, make sure y'all are unmuted because y'all are muted for the intro. In there with us today, we have ESPN draft analyst Jayden, Reid. Jordan, I appreciate you joining us today. I hope all is well with you, man. I hope you're not too stressed out with the workload that you got going on. But look, man, we got some quarterbacks to talk about. You know, Washington's number 2. They are right behind the Chicago Bears, who are in line to take another quarterback. I want to get your thoughts on who stands out at the top of the class, where you have them, and for the reasons that you have them there.
Yeah, well, appreciate you guys for having me on. This is a big draft in Washington. I know last season there was a lot of pain included in it, a lot of tough losses, but you guys were able to see it through, and this is the exciting part of all of those losses that did happen last season, which means you are able to get a quarterback at the top of the draft. And luckily for Washington, this is a big draft. As far as 4 quarterbacks, you have a new GM in place in Adam Peters, somebody that I highly respect. I think he's done a good job as far as trying to put the foundation of a roster together, bringing Dan Quinn in as well. But the most important piece of a rebuild is getting that quarterback spot solidified. And you guys haven't had one since the days of Kirk Cousins and RG3 during his earlier parts of his career. So, but with this quarterback class, I mean, it starts with Caleb Williams at the top of USC. I think he's one of the better players overall in this draft class. He's my second ranked overall player behind Marvin Harrison Jr. I think Marvin's the best overall player in this draft class, regardless of position. But just strictly talking about quarterbacks, I think Caleb is special. He's everything that you want in the position. But from Washington's standpoint, I think it comes down to Jayden Daniels versus Drake Maye. I have Drake Maye ranked higher between the two. And I know I may get a lot of pushback with Washington fans because Washington fans, they seem to be in favor of Daniels right now. I don't know which way you guys are swaying. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think with scouting and where a lot of people kind of misconstrue it a little bit is that you're kind of projecting, I should say you're really projecting who these guys can be long term. And I think long term, once you put Drake Maye in a favorable situation and get rid of a lot of those bad habits that he showed last year, I think long term, he's going to end up being the better player than Jayden Daniels. Now, Jaden was spectacular last year. I mean, he won the Heisman. That offense was electric. He took a big bump up in his development. I'm not taking anything away from him. I mean, you're splitting hairs with both of these guys. I mean, Drake is my number 3 overall player and Jaden is 5. I don't think you can go wrong with either. But when we're strictly talking about long term, who I think is going to be the better player, it would be Drake Maye for me.
I guess to even start with, well, I will say, when I saw that AJ put the promo out, and there was some people already like, finally we got somebody who's a Drake Maye guy on the show. So that was funny that you said that off rip. But let's start with Drake Maye, and given that he's your number 2 overall QB, what are the long-term traits that stand out that lets you know that, you know, his traits that you project for him in on the pro side is going to be sustainable for a long term, and you think that, you know, he is going to be a competent, sustainable, successful quarterback on the next level?
So when you go back and look at the film from 2022, I thought he was much better than what he showed last year. You're seeing the high-end arm talent. You're seeing the mobility, the flash plays that I like to call of the down the field throws. He does a really good job of driving the ball in tight windows as well, which I think is one of his better overall traits. I think that was the better version of him. But last year, with the new offensive coordinator, he lost a really good weapon in Josh Downs. We saw what he was able to do with the Colts last year. And then the offensive line was very bad last year with North Carolina, too, as well. He started to develop a lot of bad habits. And what you saw was him pressing and learning that new playbook, trying to learn new weapons. He didn't get his best receiver, Tez Walker, until midway through the season. You guys know with the NCAA stuff that was going on with him. But once Tez got back, Drake started to play a little bit better. Now he still had his bad games here and there, Clemson, NC State. The list goes on and on of some of the bad games that he had. But every now and again in those games, you would see the spurts of those big time throws down the field. He would make some mobility runs throughout the games as well, and that's why you're hearing the comparisons: Justin Herbert and then also Josh Allen with him, which are high end comps for him. But with the upside, I just think once he gets more consistent surroundings and he doesn't have to do so much of the heavy lifting, his footwork is going to get better. His decision making is going to get better. And then some of the heavy duties that he had at North Carolina, he's not going to have to worry about having so many of those things. So that's why I think the upside is so great with Drake. And I think he's going to be a better pro player than what he was as a college player. And I'm just going to trust those flashes that I saw with him.
We could jump in real quick.
Yeah, go for it. I knew you was lagging, so I wanted to make sure I flew you in. But yeah, go for it, bro.
Hey, Jordan. So, like Mual said, a lot of the fan base already knows like your love for Drake Maye. My question would be, with the projection of his traits and how it could correlate into him being a more successful NFL quarterback, do you feel as though organizations such as a Washington, New England Patriots, or these quarterback needy teams that might even be willing to come up, do they have the ability to be patient with him, learning these traits and refining his technique? Like, for example, Washington, does Adam Peters and Dan Quinn, do they have 2-3 years to wait for this guy to possibly, because it's still 50-50 chance to possibly mature as a quarterback, let's say Josh Allen, instead of the opposite of what Josh Allen has, kind of correlated to be for Buffalo?
Well, the only person that would know that is Josh Harris. I don't know how long that leash is going to be for DQ and then also Adam Peters. But with them being a new regime, I think they're going to get 2 to 3 years. I think he's going to be patient with them and allow them to see it through with Drake or Jaden. And, with these quarterbacks that have, quote unquote, flamed out over the past 5 or so years, the big thing the big worry and why they're so rushed is just because of the lack of job security with head coaches. It's such a now league with these quarterbacks. These teams don't have the proper infrastructure in place, whether it's play callers, protection, or even pass catchers. These guys are rushed onto the field so quickly. By the time they get that infrastructure in place, I mean, these dudes are done for, and they're just ruined after that. So I think they have to be really patient with Drake. But the great thing for Drake, if he does go to Washington, he already has guys like a Terry McLaurin and some of these other weapons that they already do have in place. So he already has a wide receiver one, and they're going to bring in some more weapons. They're going to draft some more guys just because they have so many draft picks. But they have the luxury of being patient with Drake. It's not a situation of where, like, for example, like Mac Jones with New England, of where the depth chart is so bad and they have to rush him on the field right now, to where I don't think they're going to ruin him. So I think they're going to have the luxury of being patient with him just because it is a new regime.
Let me hop in real quick, Jordan. Now, with I actually just watched looked at your mock draft with you and Matt Miller. You had Jayden Daniels going number 2 to Washington, but you have Drake Maye for you rated, I guess, slightly higher than Jayden Daniels. But can you talk about your reasoning for placing Jayden Daniels with Washington? And also the second part of this question, I like to ask this question to people who watch the quarterbacks often. Do you think, especially with Drake Maye, you're saying he can be better a couple of years from now, he'll be the better player eventually. Do you think that the younger guys like the Drake Mayes and the J.J. McCarthy's, are they being hurt with the guys like Jayden Daniels that can be the 5-year guys now with the transfer portal being a popular thing and them getting the extra year? Do you think them playing those less years kind of hurts the draft stock or maybe hurts the talk surrounding them because they aren't as experienced as the Jayden Daniels or the Michael Penixes?
That's a good question, both of them. When we were doing our mini mock draft, I think that's what you're talking about. I've actually went back and forth with Washington a million times. When
Mm.
I was watching LSU's pro day, I was like, oh man, I'm going to project Jayden to Washington. But then I go back and the next few days I'm at Drake's pro day and I'm like, man, DQ and AP are standing right behind them. It seems like that's their guy. So it really was just Jayden for that day. But I think the interesting part about this entire decision is that, and it's not even me going back and forth. It's just me trying to put myself in the shoes of DQ and then also AP. With AP, you have to remember, just think of the quarterbacks he had success with: Jimmy Garoppolo, Brock Purdy, those type of guys that are prototypical pocket passers that have some mobility. And I see Drake more so in the mode of that. And then you look at DQ, who he has success with: Matt Ryan, Dak Prescott over the past few years, that type of mold with Drake as well. But also, they've had other quarterbacks with Cliff Kingsbury that's been in more so the mold of Jayden Daniels when you think of Kyler Murray and some of these other quarterbacks that he's had too. So that's why I went back and forth so much with this decision, just because just trying to put myself in the shoes of both of those guys and even Cliff. And I think a lot of people are kind of overstating the decision based on Cliff, just because if one of those guys goes out and has success over the next 2 years, Cliff's going to be gone somewhere else. So you can't base this decision based on Cliff, just because if he has success with one of those guys, now you made this entire decision based on your offensive coordinator. So I don't even think it's a situation of it being about Cliff. I think it's more so of who are the guys that we have had success with. And then just backing up a little bit, putting myself in the shoes of Dan Quinn, and I talked about this during Jayden's pro day. If I'm Dan Quinn as a former defensive coordinator and head coach, of course, successful head coach, who is the type of quarterback that I would hate game planning against the most? I think that's something that he would ask Adam Peters in the draft room, and that maybe would be his perspective about which one he would favor in Jayden Daniels and Drake Maye. Now, I don't know which one he would favor, but just putting myself in his shoes, which one would he hate game planning against? Or from his days as a coordinator and a head coach, who are the type of quarterbacks that I've always struggled with? So just putting myself in their shoes, that's kind of why I went back and forth with it so much. And then on your transfer portal question, just following that up, the transfer portal isn't seen as a negative anymore. And if you guys remember, 5-10 years ago, if a guy transferred 3 or 4 times, it was a negative on your scouting report. Like, man, what the hell is going on with this dude? Like, why is he transferring so much? Was it a coach? Was it playing time? Did he bump heads with somebody? But now with NIL and the transfer portal, these guys are just thinking about self. And it's hard to blame them now. You're with this NIL money getting paid so much, you want to be able to play, just because if I make a Joe Burrow or a Jayden Daniels type of bump, now I'm potentially a top 5 pick. So it's hard to blame these players for looking out for self, just because I'm all for these players getting paid. But also you want to go somewhere where you can play as well and make that major bump up like we have seen some of these quarterbacks and even players in general make in the past.
I got one more QB question, fellas. Y'all got one, go for it. But Jordan, how much does analytics, when you're scouting and you're doing your evaluation, how much does analytics start to factor into your evaluations? And if it does, like at what point of your evaluation do you use it? Like the front end, the back end, anything like that? Because we get a lot of questions about Jayden Daniels specifically, pressure to sack ratio, the percent of times he throws on the intermediate level of the middle of the field. I personally ignored the noise. I watched what I saw. And I thought, even from a fan base standpoint, personally, I'm like, there's nothing to suggest like this is an alarming thing for me. But the data for me said something different, or for everybody else said something different. I just wanted to know like where you are on the analytical side of evaluating and trying to do a projection in that sense.
Well, it's another piece to the puzzle. And there's so many different pieces to the puzzle, but the analytical part is something that you definitely have to pay attention to, just because it's another breadcrumb that I call it that could lead you to solving that puzzle. And I haven't looked at the sack to pressure rate, but it's something that I've seen pop up quite frequently with Jaden in a negative light. And I know there's been a lot of quarterbacks on that list that haven't had a lot of success. So it's definitely something that you do have to pay attention to, especially when it starts to become a trend, just because it could help you solve that piece of the puzzle. But analytics is something that I value highly. Tape and analytics. I'm both a tape and an analytics guy. And that's something that I learned even coming up as a scout. And when I was coming up, like I was just strictly tape. Like, what does the tape show me? That's what I'm going to trust at the end of the day. But these analytics really matter a lot too, just because there's a lot of things that you may not see on tape that does show up in the analytics. But also when you value two players in the same bucket or in the same tier, not just speaking on quarterbacks, that analytical data could be something that's quote unquote a tiebreaker for one of those guys, especially when you're talking about. So in the scouting world, they're called data darlings. So you may have a data darling of somebody, just for example, that you guys may have drafted in the past. That's a data darling. Like Quan Martin was a data darling last year for me. Somebody that ended up going, I believe he ended up going the third round or something like that. Tested phenomenally. Second, yeah, went second round. Tested phenomenally at the combine, but there were some things that were in his favor that pushed him up the safety board. So you have to pay attention to those data darlings just because it helps you on the front end, but also the back end too. So definitely don't ignore it. But if it starts to become a trend, that's when things definitely tend to get worrisome with those quarterbacks or any position in general, honestly.
Jordan, I actually got a fun question for you real quick. You don't have to go into detail on this, but last 2 years for quarterback prospects, give me your top 4 as they were prospects between, the Stroud, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, and anyone from this draft class. How would you rank your top 4 quarterbacks from the last 2 years?
Including this year's class too?
Including this year's class,
okay.
Yep.
So I would have Caleb 1. 2 for me, that's a great question. It probably would be Bryce 2 for me. I was a big fan of Bryce. He was my top quarterback last year. 3 would be CJ. And then after that, it would be Drake and then Jaden. That's how I would have it. I was a fan of Anthony Richardson, but once again, the data wasn't really in his favor in certain areas. And then the sample size was so small with Anthony Richardson, with him only having, I believe it was 13 starts at the time. But I always said this, and not even using hindsight, I have a hard time of betting on outliers if I did work in the league. But on the media side, it's easier to bet on those outliers just because we're not worrying about wins and losses. Once we get a prospect wrong, we just move on to the next year and study the next year's class. But when you're in the league, you always worry about, or you have to worry about your track record with these guys, just because if you don't get it right, you're going to get fired. So that would be my order of those guys. But I mean, we've had some great quarterbacks in the league over the past few years, but Caleb definitely would be my one. I think he's far and away my top guy.
Yeah, for me, I want to kind of pivot away from the quarterback conversation, as Washington has not just only a hole at the quarterback position, but also at the tackle position, whether you want to say left or right tackle. One of the guys that I'm huge on, but unfortunately experienced a torn quad and battling back from, and I think he just had his pro day maybe yesterday. A guy out of Yale, left tackle, Kieran Amagati. I don't know. It's
Amagazi.
I'm
Amagazi,
but I'm not Nigerian. I don't know how to say it like that. But yeah, that's a guy that I'm in favor of. How do you compare him in reference to like Jordan Morgan? And I'm just strictly basing this off of like what we're seeing from mocks from guys like yourself or whatever. How do you see those two guys in particular, comparing them, translating to the NFL ranks? And is Washington's second round pick, whether it be, I think 36 and 40 is where they sit.
Yeah, 36.
Would
40.
that be too high to take? Would that be too high to take a guy like Amagati out of Yale?
Yeah, it would be a little early for me. I see him more so as a late day 2 type of player. So fringe second round or early third round, I'll be a little bit more comfortable taking him there. But the tricky part about those FCS and small school guys is that you have to separate them from the competition that they're playing. And I mean, they're going to dominate the competition just because the talent does stand out with them, but you have to evaluate the traits just because that's what you're trying to see translates over to the next level. So how fluid is his pass set? What is his strength levels like? Is his awareness good? Is he seeing these twists and these stunts? Then also, how physical is he? But this is why it's so valuable to me of seeing these guys in postseason all-star games, just because that's when the competition is really leveled out as far as the competition that they're facing. But also, sometimes you get those small school guys that it doesn't faze them at all. Like Quinion Mitchell of Toledo, the corner, is a great example of where there was a lot of question marks about how he would transition from the MAC conference over to playing these guys from Alabama and Georgia and these SEC schools that he's seeing at the Senior Bowl. And that speed of the game didn't phase him at all. So those are some of the things that you have to trust as far as those traits being able to translate over to the next level. So that's the key factor, or the key things that you have to factor into Amageji's stock moving forward. Of, do you trust those traits to eventually transfer over? I mean, he's 6'5". I think he weighed in at 323 pounds at the pro day, 36 and 1/8 inch arms, which would have been the longest at the combine. So he has those traits from a size standpoint. Now it's just a matter of, do you trust the strength levels? Do you trust the awareness? And then do you trust the other traits to transfer over?
From a receiver standpoint, same thing with what AJ mentioned, 36 and 40. I mean, even still, 6 picks in the top 100 for Washington. I don't think they about to rock with De'Ami Brown or Jamison Crowder as their third or fourth receiver, man. Who do we have in that top 100? Obviously, second round and later, that you think is a valuable plug and play immediately type of receiver in that aspect.
So I will say this: they have picks. I think they have 5 in the top 100, as you just mentioned. I would be
6.
surprised if they didn't. They have 6. Sorry. I would be surprised if they didn't move around a little bit with those second and those third round picks, just because Washington is still in the foundational stages of solidifying the roster. So if it were me, and if I was Adam Peters, I would try to make 2 first round picks. So maybe package 36 and one of those third or fourth round picks and try to trade up into the back end of the first round of one of those tackles that slip for whatever reason, whether it's a Marius Mims or Jordan Morgan or Tyler Guyton, somebody like that, so I could get a high end talent. And I think just kicking off a new regime and then building your roster with those 2 first round picks, I think that would be really good. But from a receiver standpoint, I mean, this wide receiver class is so loaded, man. You can have your pick of the litter in that second round. Xavier Legette of South Carolina is somebody that I like. Florida State's Keon Coleman is somebody else that I like. But a little bit later on, maybe mid to late second round, Ricky Pearsall of Florida is somebody else that I like. And then also Troy Franklin of Oregon is another name that's getting quite a bit of buzz in the league too. So this wide receiver class is really strong. We could get as many as 6 or 7 to go in the first round, but I have 13 day 2 grades on these receivers, which is an astronomically high number. So trust your scouts and then get in there and see who fits Drake Maye or Jayden Daniels the best. I think they're going to have an opportunity to really add some playmakers, though.
Well, I guess for my last question regarding the draft, now Mual, I mean, both AJ and Mual hit on 2 positions that I love, that we need. For another one that we really need, because right now all we have is Zach Ertz there at the tight end position. If you're looking at the tight end position for a future number 1 player at that depth chart, who are you looking at in rounds 2 or 3 for a tight end?
Yeah, so I'll give you guys one that is red hot in the league right now. His name is Ben Sinnott at Kansas State. One of the best stories in the draft. He actually was a walk-on when he first got to Kansas State, 6-year player. Worked his way all the way up the depth chart, and I think he could be the second tight end drafted off of the board after Brock Bowers. And I know Jatavian Sanders is getting a lot of love from Texas, but there's a lot of people that really like Ben Sinnott. So whether you take him at 36 or 40 or a little bit later on in the second or even the third round, I definitely think he could be somebody that could really help you out. And Washington has a huge need at tight end. I definitely think they want to get a more high-end player at that position. So if you're looking for that Swiss Army knife, keep an eye on Ben Sinnott of Kansas State.
Jordan, man, I appreciate the time that you gave us today. I do want to give you the floor just one time. Let the people know where they can find you, everything that you got going on, anything that you got upcoming. Hey, the floor is yours, man. It's Plug Talk.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Jordan_Reid. That's JORDAN_REID. No, I am not the former Commanders tight end. I do get that a lot on Twitter.
You sure he wasn't out there catching?
Yeah, I'm sure I wasn't.
Touchdowns.
He a shade darker than Jordan. He a little shade darker.
Just a little bit. We can switch bank accounts though. I'll take his bank account.
Hey, bro.
We can all be Jordan Reid of the former Washington Redskins for that one.
But yeah, you can find me on Twitter there, and you can find all my work on ESPN Plus alongside my colleagues Mel Kiper Jr., Phil Yates, and then also Matt Miller as well.
Boom, there it is, man. ESPN analyst Jordan Reid up here on the Trap or Die podcast. We'll catch y'all next time. Y'all be easy.